what's going on, guys? Elden Ring lore is very convoluted, and I don't think that's a surprise to anyone who's experienced the FromSoftware games in the past. It's convoluted by design, crafted in a way that allows individual interpretation, but still weaves enough together to present a story that's deep and lasting. But that comes with a bit of a consequence. Due to the story being purposely open-ended, we inevitably have some unsolved mysteries, and that's what I want to dive into today. Today I want to break down my top 10 most intriguing unsolved mysteries of Elden Ring, and give you my thought process on them, in hopes that we get some answers in DLC. But let me preface this with something. I have confirmed that the questions I'm going to present do not have an explicit answer. You may have your own assumptions about what you think the answer is, and I will have my own as well. But when I say explicit, I mean it is not stated in the lore, and we don't have an overtly obvious conclusion. And another thing I want to say is that themes do not count as an answer to these mysteries. Even though certain characters or events in the story may follow an overarching theme, that theme itself is not the reason certain things happen. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and dive into it. The first question I would like to present today, that has no apparent answer, is how did we, the Tarnished, end up in the Chapel of Anticipation? The supposed lore story of how we got there is that our Tarnished died battling in the Badlands, and then was called back by the guidance of grace, back to the lands between. But there's definitely something missing here. In the intro cutscene, we see our character reviving from the dead in a sort of void space, and we're told to cross the fog to the lands between. But where are we? The place we're standing looks oddly similar to the inside of the Erd Tree, but the problem arises when our character awakens in the Chapel of Anticipation, which is on a secluded plateau with no points of access, and far away from the Erd Tree. Now I do think there's a good theory here, especially in context of the symbolism on the chapel. We can see lots of iconography of the Age of Plenty, statues and reliefs of maidens pouring out sap of the Erd Tree, and one extending a hand in prayer over where we emerge. So perhaps it was a sort of healing ritual that revived us from this purgatory across the fog. However, due to the fate of our maiden, we'll never know for sure. Number 9 happens at the end of Ranni's quest. After we give her the Finger Slayer blade and she slays her own 2 fingers, we then find out the unfortunate fate of her companions, that they were both attacked by Black Knife assassins, with Blythe losing his sanity and us having to put him down. The mystery arises when we find Iji's corpse. We can see he's leaning backwards and covered in black flame. The bodies of several Black Knife assassins are also scattered around the area, suggesting that Iji did this. But the problem is that none of these characters have any association with the black flame. So how did he end up this way? The Black Knife assassins are known to use the red flames of destined death, but Iji is a blacksmith of the Carrion Royals, who should be well versed in the art of magic. But the black flame is something leaked to the Godskins, who have absolutely nothing to do with anyone involved in this scenario. The information for an explanation of why this is simply does not exist. I really don't know of any links between the Carrions or the Black Knife assassins and the Godskins, and to say that it was Iji who used the black flame would really only be a guess. I have seen some theories going around to potentially explain Iji's death, but none that I found to be super credible, so I am very interested to see what you guys can come up with down in the comments below. At number 8, we're going to be diving into some of the characters that we don't hear much about, but are placed in a context that makes them overall very important. And there's 2 that I want to discuss. The first being the God of the Dragons, and the second being the Blind Swordsman. But let's start with the God of the Dragons. The Remembrance of the Dragon Lord states, the Dragon Lord whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erd Tree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return. So the question is, who was this god that was fled? And for that, we have almost no trails of evidence to chase after. The Blind Swordsman is a similar case of obscurity as well. The Blue Dancer charm says, the dancer in blue represents a fairy who in legend bestowed a flowing sword upon a blind swordsman. Blade in hand, the swordsman sealed away an ancient god, a god that was wrought itself. So we have a description of these characters that are very powerful, the fairy and the blind swordsman, but we never hear anything else about them. And there's barely any evidence whatsoever of their existence within the world. And so that's where my question arises. If these characters were so significant, why do we have almost no records of them, or evidence at all? I'll have to say I don't have the answer, but it is really cool to think about. At number 7, we have the question of what actually are the fingers? When it comes to their lore, we have a good picture of what they do. They're envoys of the Greater Will sent to communicate between the Tarnished and the Greater Will. But I mean physically, what are they? We can see that they're made of flesh and have wounds and are capable of bleeding, but when we find them dead at the top of the Divine Towers, they're made of wood. So I'm not exactly sure how to interpret this. The big question is, why fingers? And when it comes to the lore, I've never seen an explanation. Now, if you've seen my mushroom video, I've told you my theory about why I think they're fingers, but as to an answer that only comes from the game, the theory that I've heard that I consider to be the most credible is that they may be repurposed hands of giants, but even then that doesn't explain everything. So what do you think they are? At number 6, I want to pose the question of why was Godwyn killed? Now I know why the Night of the Black Knives happened, but why was Godwyn specifically chosen? Or was he chosen at all to become the martyr for death? And that's where the variables arise. We know he was known as Godwyn the Golden, and is said to be representative of the sun, eclipsed by Ranni, who represents the dark moon. But again, that just brings up the question of why, and to that we simply don't have the answers. Godwyn is a character that I would like to see explored more in DLC potentially, because like a lot of other things on this list, he seems way too important to have so little information and background, especially prior to his transformation into the Prince of Death. And I feel like the only way to ever get those answers is to go back in time. So until DLC drops, it's just gonna remain a mystery. Number 5 is where things start to get pretty weird. At the end of Ranni's quest, we get to go to the Moonlight Altar, to the Cathedral of Manus Celes, where we can find the site where Ranni slayed the two fingers, deep underground. But have you ever taken the time to actually look around this place? The environmental storytelling here is weird. If you look at the wreckage of the cathedral itself, the roof is broken apart and shattered, while the walls and much of the exterior is still intact, almost as if something fell from above. And considering that the fingers are far below ground, in a hole that also lines up with the damage, the logical conclusion here that would be extremely strange is that the fingers themselves crash landed from above. And considering that it's named Manus Celeste, which means the celestial hand, maybe that's not so crazy. The only problem is that we'll never actually know for sure, because the only details that we have about this place come from the environmental storytelling. But this is one of my favorite mysteries in the lore, because the idea of one of the two fingers coming from space and crash landing is so cool. But I really just wish we got a tiny bit more information so that we could draw a real conclusion. Number 4 is one of the very first questions we ever had about the lore that never truly got explained. And that is, what is Melina's real identity? Because we have a few clues, but nothing really concrete in any direction. She tells us that her purpose is as the Kindling Maiden, but also tells us that she's not a maiden at all. She's burned and bodiless and was born at the foot of the Erd Tree. But if we do the Frenzied Flame ending, then we get a secret cutscene where her form changes and she vows that she will hunt us down, seeking us as far as we may travel. But the problem here is that no character in the entire game references her at all. It's almost as if her character is completely absent from all of the lore. And so that's where the mystery arises that she may have another identity. The only clue we have is that her internal file name is Daughter of Marika, but even that's not a whole lot to go off of. Personally, I'm in the camp that she may be the character known in the lore as the Gloam-Eyed Queen, but even that is highly debated. Like a lot of other things on this list, there's potential room to explore her story in DLC, but as it stands right now, this is going to be another mystery which we'll never truly solve. At number 3, we bring into question our hub space to ask what actually is the Roundtable Hold. We know it's a place set aside for the Tarnished, but physically we have no idea where it is. We know we're able to reach it by Melina guiding us there, and that when we burn the Erd Tree, the Roundtable Hold burns as well. But I find it extremely unlikely that it's residing inside the Erd Tree, since other Tarnished characters that we can find are free and able to come and go as they please. But we can find a replica of the Roundtable Hold in Lane Dell, in a place of older architecture with the icon of Godfrey. Now, my personal theory on it is that the Roundtable Hold may be sort of metaphysical, and formed as a joint mindscape by the memory of the Tarnished, but the reality of it is that so many things about this place just don't add up. But when it comes to hub worlds that don't make sense, this is nothing new for FromSoftware. Perhaps it's similar to the way the Tarnished reaches the lands between, with it being a place beyond the fog. But I think until we can solve what the fog actually is, this one is going to remain unsolved. Number 2 is one that I really wish we had an explanation for, and this one is about the statue that we can find in Malekith's arena in Farum Azula. At the back of the room, we can see a statue of what appears to be a girl, surrounded by 3 wolves, and beneath an icon of the Elden Ring Ring that we see nowhere else in the game. This statue looks so significant but does absolutely nothing, and like most things on this list, is not referenced in the lore, as far as we know. But that may not have always been the case. Concept art depicts this statue as glowing, clearly emanating some sort of power. And so the question is, who is this girl, who are the wolves, and what is the symbol that depicts the Elden Ring? The most speculated character here that I think holds the most credibility is that this statue is maybe Marika. This is Malekith's arena, and Malekith was Marika's shadowbound beast. But that is just pure speculation. As for the symbol, a lot of people seem to think that this is the symbol of the Crucible, and I think that's entirely possible. However, the truth is there's no explicit answer here. When it comes to the wolves, I find it interesting that the first spirit summon we get from Ranni are 3 wolves. So is there a connection there? I'm not entirely sure. We don't have any depictions of Ranni prior to her transformation, but whoever that statue is definitely important in some capacity. So let me know what you think about that down below. And the final unsolved mystery of Elden Ring is a pretty general one. It encompasses a lot of other questions, but what exactly is the cosmos of Elden Ring? There's a lot of things in this game that come from beyond. We have several different moons throughout the lore that are worshipped, stars that dictate fate itself and can be held back, gravity manipulating creatures that come from a far off dark void, and even the Elden Ring itself is said to have arrived on a golden meteorite. And so the big question here is, what exactly is out there? This is obviously a topic that will almost definitely never get explored, as it's absolutely ambiguous on purpose. But there's so much of this game's lore that involves space and a universe beyond the lands between. And I wish I had some kind of manual or book that I could go through that tells me everything about the cosmology. But of course, that's not something we're ever gonna get, and for now we only have speculation to rely on, which I think is equally fun. But for now, everything on this list remains unsolved, and I do really hope that when we get more of Elden Ring, which we know is on the way, that it answers some of the questions I brought up here. Every one of these topics could warrant an entire video on its own, and I know I only gave each one about a minute, but I didn't want to input my own speculation too much as to not steer you one way or the other. But I have verified multiple times that nothing on this list has an explicit explanation, so keep in mind when commenting there is no right answer, at least that we know of. Either way though guys, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here, and with all that, I'll catch you in the next one.